Okay, yeah, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our Friday morning drop-in sessions. This morning, we're going to be looking, or Colin's going to be sharing with us some examples of how we use Skore internally. So I will let Colin go on.
Thanks, Craig. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, the session was called How We Use Skore at Skore. So I will deep dive a bit into how we leverage the tool for our own use. So I'm not going to describe and show you the actual content of the process, even though we can spark conversation, but more how do we use it. So here I'm sharing, this is our internal workspace that we are using for all sorts of things. And I am specifically into the folder related to product development that we call Skore App, just everything related to the app or the platform. The way we've organized, so we started the feature, the folder is a fairly new feature, so we start organizing things in folders. And then what I have in this Skore App folder, I have created a portal that I call Product and DevSecOps, so Development, Security, and Operations portal, which is the entry point. And this is something for people I've been talking with in the last couple of weeks. This is really something I recommend. So I have at the top as a pinned process, this is an entry point. And then below that, I have all the other processes, a bit more granular specific processes that are mapped, but they are, as we see, I will open this portal in a minute. They're all linked from the portal. So the way I'm accessing even my own processes, I'm just clicking on the portal and then navigate to where I need to. The reason we created this portal is really twofold. We started mapping the processes us internally, how we work. At the beginning of Skore, we were using a lot of contractors for the development. So we needed to have development processes in place because every time we were having new developers, we had to retrain them. Then since then, we do the development in-house. So it's stabilized, but also Skore grew. So the scope of the work done in the technical team went crazy exponential around infrastructure, around incident management, around all sorts of things. So this was the original need. It started by us having to create a shared understanding, creating a common way of working with our team internally, and then it grew. And having these processes documented came very handy because we started having bigger customers asking us more questions on how we work, how we deal with incidents, how we manage security. So we started publishing these processes. So this is why we see that they are all publicly shared, because we send a link. When someone asks me, can you share with us the infrastructure? I just send them a link to the diagram. It's always the latest version. And they can see for themselves, and then it forms the basis of the conversation on which we can start talking. So started as an internal need, and then the team grew, what we were doing went exponential. And also now it's very handy when customers are asking questions, we can just share these processes. So let's open the portal. So I've created this landing page. We have a drop-in session on a landing page that you can find on YouTube and in the community website. So this landing page sort of is two ways. There's a very high-level list of all the big buckets of processes that I just created as texts, but also what I have below is the picture of how the whole thing fits together. In my very process-oriented mind, things need to fix. Things need to fit together. So sometimes it's easier to access with the list, and sometimes it's also good to understand how we see the world. How do I see the world? Well, you see that it's mostly a CTO led processes. That doesn't mean that I'm actually doing everything, but I own, at this stage, it's really describing what I own. And then, so instead of creating detailed view in each of these processes, I created in a separated process. So if I'm clicking on, let's say, provide support and manage incidents, let's take this one. This is actually a link to another process. So from an end user perspective, there's almost no difference. I'm just clicking somewhere and it brings me to another page. But for me, I will just go back to the process to show you what I'm doing here. So I have my landing page. Skore App folder again. I have my landing page, which is the DevOps portal. But then when I'm going into incident management, I'm actually navigating to this process. And the benefit of having a separated process is that it can have its own life cycle. So it can have its own access rights. I'm not using access rights here, but it could have its own access rights. It could have its own owner. It could have also its own property. Maybe we don't need to share this one publicly. And it has its own revisions control, which makes it much easier to show. I'll show you that, what I mean with the infrastructure one. So let's go back direct into incident management. So now I'm in a process. I've left my landing page. I'm now in a process. So this is a process that we keep refining all the time to set the expectations among each other in the team. How do we work? How do we classify issues when we receive them? But also, this is a process that we are sharing with customers, large enterprise, asking us, what's your process of dealing with issue? Here it is, and then we can have a call. We talk about it. It's very visual. It's very good to explain how we do things and why. And then in this process, I also see we have drill down or detailed views where we try to understand how things fit together. What does it need to do? In which order things are coming, and who does what? So it's proven many times very good discussions when we review that to agree on how we deal with things. So this is one of the process. And then in terms of navigation, making a nice end user experience, I created a big button here, back to the portal. So wherever you are in these process maps, there's always a very convenient way to navigate back to the process. I'm gonna pick another one. So in terms of, it's not really a process that you will see here. I will take the one for infrastructure. It's not really a process, but it was, it worked very well. Skore being a diagramming tool, essentially, it worked really well at making things look like a Skore process. So that's our infrastructure. This is how all the services and servers we maintain to make sure everything is up and running. And this process in particular, I'm really leveraging the version control, so the revisions management, because actually the infrastructure, I wouldn't believe it myself, but it evolves fairly quickly and fairly often. Not only because I have here the infrastructure, but I also have all the services at the bottom, all the services and the ways of working to maintain this infrastructure. And this actually changes fairly often. So here, this process, if I'm going into the revision history, this process, I'm publishing it. So I literally use the publication to have a sort of version control over there. So what I'm seeing here, if you remember how the published version works, when I open a process by default, it always shows me the published version. But then I can still, so when I open my process, I have the one revision I want people to see. But I see in the button here, see latest edits. I've continued making changes. So if I click this little button, I see the latest change. I'm gonna zoom out. So you won't notice the difference if you didn't read the process, but we are adding a search server. So we are working on a full text search in Skore to be able to search everywhere within the process, within the workspaces, all over the place. And for that, we need a dedicated search server. So I've added that to the infrastructure. So it's in the diagram. We could really fit, okay, is it in the VPC, in the private cloud and everything? But also this is not yet live. This is not the production infrastructure yet. So that's why it's not a published process. So when someone is on the DevSecOps portal and they go to infrastructure diagram, they will end up on the diagram of the actual version of the infrastructure. Another question we have is how do we actually map the processes as a small business? Processes are changing very often. So a question I have is, I don't want to maintain my processes. Organization is changing all the time. So how do you keep your processes up to date? And my answer is it really depends at which level of details you are mapping your processes. Because obviously, if you map the processes in a very detailed way, especially in a small business like us, it changes all the time. So you would spend your time updating the process, or they will, more realistically, they will always be wrong. So the approach we take is we map processes in a fairly high level way, because the details is not really what matters. We are a small team, we can talk to each other and we know the details. So if I'm going back into my incidents, or let's take another one for the fun, the governance one. So the governance one, what we've mapped here, the security, risk governance, and business continuity process, what we've mapped here and in the lower levels are very big buckets of work that we do. If I go into identify the risks, these are things that we do and that we will always do. Maybe the responsibility will change over time, but we will always do. Now, what changes very, very frequently is how we do it. Because we evolve, we find new tools, we find new practices, we use, we find an opportunity to improve, we prioritize some work. So how we do it keep changing. The way we identify vulnerabilities, for example, we keep discovering and implementing new ways of doing that. So that's why I'm not mapping below that, because that would change every day. But identifying vulnerability is something we do, we will always do, and this is something that is under my responsibility. So to the question, how do you keep your process maps up to date all the time? I'm keeping them up to date by having the right level of details, by having something that is high level enough, that it's easy to explain and we understand what's going on, but not so detailed that as soon as I map, it's just irrelevant the next day because we found something, we found a different ways of working. So that was something I wanted to share in the how we use Skore at Skore. I'm happy to respond to any question, any
I was just gonna add something. Thanks for that, Colin. One of the things we do is we often get requests for this information, and there's always this expectation that information gets provided through a Word document or a PDF. So we actually have a sort of standard infrastructure and security document, which Colin's created in Word. We export or save it as a PDF, and it has all the kind of main sections. And then Colin has embedded the links to all of these pages in here. So we can still email somebody over the PDF document. And then when they read it, they can then click off to access these sorts of documents, because I think there is still this thinking sometimes that people are used to getting that type of document, and if you send them a bunch of links, it's sort of a bit unusual. Whereas actually, when we do it that way, we get some good feedback on how that gets received, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good starter for a conversation. I mean, you can have technical conversation with non-technical people, which is great.
So, any questions or thoughts?
Just looking at the, I suppose, the revisioning of this and the way you use that internally. So you add your own revisions whenever you want to that, and they're only visible to you up until the point that you publish them?
No, so they're visible to all people who can see the. So when I'm clicking on infrastructure here, it will open the published, so let's be precise, it will open the latest published version of a process. Okay, this is the version I want people to see. If I'm an editor, I will still see this button here, see latest edits. I will see this button. So someone who knows Skore or is a bit curious can still navigate to the latest version, the one where we have the search server. But this is not the version that will be presented to them in the first place.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
So that's good, because that allows me, what I like about that is allows me to have a published version. I'm gonna open this page. I have a published version, but I can still do some work. I can continue. I can continue doing the work, evolving my diagram, speaking with the development team on how things fit together, while not touching what 99.9% of users will see and probably will stay on this page.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, I was going to say, your description of how you actually you're developing this new service in the product, and so modeling it out is useful for you and your team. But it's not the official version yet. That's not how the product works today. So
yeah,
that's why you use the publishers. Yeah, interesting.
Exactly. And so here we see AWS Lambda. So we switched all the infrastructure to a serverless architecture in the past, recently. But if I go to the previous version here, the was published, if I'm opening it, we will see the old version of. Okay, so here, this was the snapshot of like the official infrastructure before we moved to Lambda and serverless. So yeah, we were using a sort of a mix of different services that we simplified, and it was a bit different. Especially, I mean, before we were managing servers ourselves, where now it's all serverless. So people do it for us, experts.